Jonas clutched the handrails as he descended the crumbling staircase, his heart pounding with each uncertain step. The stairwell was almost pitch black, punctuated only by the thin flickering beam of his battery-powered flashlight. Decades ago, before the cosmic debris cloud had sealed Earth in perpetual darkness, a sequence of overhead lights would have illuminated the concrete spiral. Now, the dull glow of his flashlight was a scarce luxury. At the bottom, the stale air felt thick and tasted of dust. All these years of gloom had made the old bomb shelter into a warren of musty passageways. Jonas exhaled, trying to calm himself. He glanced over his shoulder to see Nadine, her braided hair framing a face drawn taut by stress and hunger. Behind her came Marcus, the group's longtime scavenger, carrying a battered duffel bag stuffed with what scarce medical supplies they hoped to salvage from the depths of the abandoned shelter. "Careful," Jonas muttered. "Some of these steps look ready to give out." Nadine nodded silently. Marcus moved in slow, deliberate motions. They had all heard the stories of the old stairs collapsing when too much weight pressed on them. In the darkness, even the simplest task could become fatal. At last they reached the landing, which branched in two directions. By the flicker of the flashlight, Jonas saw the remains of rusted signs pointing to Arms Depot on the left, Infantry Quarters on the right. The plan was to sweep the living quarters for anything that could potentially help them survive the never-ending night. Food, even if decades old, sometimes proves salvageable in the sealed rations left behind by those who had once staffed this base. Jonas ran a hand across a nearby wall and felt the sticky residue of algae that thrived in the damp gloom. Though the surface was cold, the stifling humidity filled the corridors like a heavy blanket, the slow drip of water somewhere in the distance echoing ominously. There was always the possibility of contaminated puddles, or worse, something creeping in the darkness. He tried not to think about the creatures rumored to roam the ashen wastes above. People called them the Shadows, some said they were once humans who had adapted too well to the dark. Others whispered of beasts mutated or conjured by cosmic radiation in a world without sunlight. Even if the Shadows were only rumor, Jonas knew every unknown corner could harbor new threats. Trusting the gloom was never wise. Marcus tugged on Jonas's sleeve to motion him forward. In a whisper that shattered the stillness, he said, "I'll check that room, you two scan the hall." Jonas nodded. He and Nadine advanced, the stale air pressing close on all sides. The hallway was lined with doorways whose metal frames had long rusted over. Many hung ajar, creaking in the faint current of air. Jonas quietly gripped the handle of the nearest door and pushed. The hinges screeched, and dust swirled in the feeble flashlight beam. Inside, he could make out rows of ancient bunk beds crammed against the far wall. He stepped in carefully. "Stay close," he murmured to Nadine. She stood behind him, scanning the floor with her own smaller flashlight. Eerie silence wrapped around them, broken only by the thumping of their boots against the concrete. The bunk beds looked as if they'd been stripped in a hurry. Tattered sheets lay in piles, metal frames sagged and squealed with the slightest pressure. A few rusted footlockers remained at the foot of each bed, untouched for years. Jonas crouched near the nearest locker, pressing gently on its lid. A musty smell of mold and stale air wafted out. Inside he found a yellowed stack of papers, old instructions about ration distributions, a map of the base, some personal letters likely left behind. No sign of supplies. He grimaced before shifting to the next locker, rummaging with careful hands. Nadine, a few feet away, discovered another footlocker. She pried it open and let out a quiet gasp. "Jonas," she whispered urgently. "Look at this." He turned, aiming the flashlight where she pointed. Inside her locker lay several battered tins wrapped in plastic. Expiration dates from decades ago, but they seemed intact. Energy bars, or perhaps some form of condensed meal. In these desperate times, anything might sustain them. Jonas felt a momentary surge of hope. "We'll take them," he said. "We need to test them, but they're better than nothing." Nadine slid them carefully into her backpack. Her eyes glimmered for half a second before the weight of their reality crushed that flicker of optimism. Jonas taped the footlocker shut again to keep other things from scattering. He glanced around. "We should probably check the other bunks too." but a noise in the hallway made them freeze. A faint scratching, as if metal scraped against stone. Jonas's mind darted to Marcus, who might be rummaging in the next room. Yet from the corner of his eye, Jonas could see Nadine's tense posture. She was listening too, her muscles rigid. They killed their flashlights without a word, letting darkness envelop them. Ears straining, they heard the scrape again, some distance away. Then silence. In this endless night, it was impossible to tell if the hush meant danger was gone or lurking too close. Jonas exhaled slowly, turning his flashlight back on at its lowest setting. "Let's see if Marcus found anything," he murmured. They retraced their steps. The corridor felt even darker and colder, as if it were draining the scant warmth from Jonas's body. Their footsteps sounded jarringly loud to his ears. Coming to a T-junction, they spotted a faint glow from under the door of what must have been Marcus's search area. Nadine opened it, revealing a small arsenal with empty racks. Marcus stood in a corner, rummaging through a trunk. "I found some old flares," he said, holding up a handful of cylindrical tubes. "Might still work." "Keep them," Jonas urged. "We heard something out there." Marcus's expression grew troubled. Could have been an animal. Or worse. Despite the chill, sweat beaded on Jonas's forehead. "We should head back soon. There's no telling if the place is stable." Marcus nodded, stuffing the flares into his duffel. He snugged its strap over his shoulder, and the three made their way back to the staircase. On the journey up, every rustle of fabric, every drip of water, magnified into potential threats. Even so, the blackness of the upper levels somehow felt marginally safer than the claustrophobic catacombs below. Emerging into the open city, they shut the rusted hatch behind them. The meteorite debris that had blotted out the sun decades ago still spanned the sky with swirling opaque clouds. Barely any moonlight filtered through the thick gloom. The battered remains of towering buildings loomed like jagged tombstones. Sickly, bioluminescent moss clung to chipped concrete, providing scant flickers of greenish light. Electrical grids had long since failed. What few settlements remained relied on hand-cranked generators or precious fuel, relentlessly rationed. "Hold up," Marcus said, raising a cautionary hand. Jonas and Nadine followed his gaze. The once bustling city streets had become twisted pathways of rubble. Shattered windows and collapsed facades created an unholy labyrinth. Marcus carefully examined the route ahead, scanning for movement. Though Jonas attempted to remain calm, his heart quickened each time he remembered the rumors of the shadows. Whether they were feral beasts or human survivors gone mad, they were said to blend seamlessly with the permanent night, able to see or sense movement better than any ordinary human. On top of that, they were vicious. The trio pressed onward, weaving between abandoned cars and decaying heaps of trash that had piled up in the early days of the apocalypse, when everyone believed the darkness would last only a few months. Generators had flickered out one by one. Panic had torn civilized communities apart, leading to hoarding and violent conflicts. Famine, illness, and madness followed. Jonas couldn't remember the world before the cosmic debris cloud. He was barely old enough when day last touched the earth, but older survivors still recounted stories of bright mornings and warming sunshine, as if speaking of fairy tales. Their settlement, known simply as Haven, lay tucked beneath the skeletal frames of two collapsed apartment towers. Through painstaking work and ingenuity, the survivors built barricades, strung up makeshift lighting along safe corridors, and established a shared greenhouse under artificial lamps. There, they cultivated mushrooms and select plants that could adapt to near-total absence of sunlight. Livestock was scarce, rats, mostly. Occasionally bigger animals that were coaxed to survive on algae and other subterranean feed. Despite the gloom, Haven persisted like a fortress of faint luminescence amid the sea of black. Returning through the settlement's reinforced gates, Jonas spotted a solitary guard perched atop a wall constructed of scrap metal. The guard, Leon, waved them through. Inside the perimeter, the air smelled of burning wood and the faint tang of cooked algae. A set of carefully rigged floodlights bathed a courtyard in a pale glow. Residents hurried about their tasks, heads down, as though even that artificial brightness would betray them to lurking foes. Jonas, Nadine, and Marcus made their way to the communal hall, a makeshift structure pieced together from various salvaged materials. Within, they stored what precious resources they could scavenge. Lately, morale had been low. The supply runs had grown more dangerous, and the sightings of strange creatures stalking the perimeter were becoming more frequent. They set their meager haul on a rickety table. Winston, the settlement's quartermaster, came over, lines of exhaustion etched on his face. Jonas explained the expedition, emphasizing the rations and flares, but also the troubling noise they'd heard. Winston frowned, tapping his pen restlessly against a clipboard. "Sounds like we should reinforce the southwestern gates," he said. "We've had a few people claim they hear something out there at night, scratching around. If there's a den of them out there..." He trailed off, letting the unspoken possibilities settle uncomfortably in the air. "Anyway, good job with the supplies. Every bit helps." Winston logged the items. Marcus left for the generator station to ensure the flickering lights wouldn't give out that night. Nadine lingered, her tired eyes scanning the hall. Jonas placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We did well," he said quietly. "Let's get some rest." But rest came fitfully. Jonas spent much of that night in his small bunk in the back of the settlement, half drifting in and out of troubled sleep. Memories plagued him of what older folks had told him about the cosmic event. A collision of two distant celestial bodies had scattered an immense cloud of dust and debris that had drifted into Earth's orbit. Scientists had tried to reassure everyone at first. There was simply less sunlight each day, they said. But the gloom deepened, the temperature plummeted, and soon a twilight settled that refused to leave. The last vestiges of daylight disappeared behind a swirling canopy of cosmic ash, and humanity was plunged into half a lifetime of darkness. The next morning, which was as black as any other, Jonas rejoined Nadine near the greenhouse. Artificial lights illuminated neat rows of planters brimming with mushrooms and pale, genetically engineered vegetables. A handful of older, stooped survivors bustled among them, pruning and watering carefully. Nadine was kneeling, analyzing a tray of seedlings, her brow furrowed in frustration. She glanced up at Jonas. "They're not germinating as well as expected," she murmured. "We must be missing something, maybe extra nutrients or a better filtration system for the water." Jonas pursed his lips. "We'll keep trying. Maybe we can find supplies in the old labs near the outskirts." They both knew any trip beyond Haven's barricades posed tremendous risk, but in a world cloaked in eternal night, anything that kept them alive remained worth the danger. They discussed it quietly, concluding that soon they would need to take another expedition, this time to rummage through the ruins of what had once been a science facility, searching for nutrient solutions or specialized equipment. On the settlement's edge, Jonas spotted Winston giving direction to a trio of sturdy workers. They hefted sheets of metal siding toward the southwestern gate. The group was bracing the outer fence, welding extra segments. Sparks lit the gloom in brilliant flashes. Jonas noted that the men kept their eyes peeled on the darkness beyond, flinching at every sudden noise. Things had grown tense. Some whispered that the shadows were more than just rumor. A wave of disappearances near the outer edges spurred talk of monstrous attackers. Others insisted it was feral animals or rival human bands. Jonas wanted to believe that people who had lost their moral compasses were behind the strange sightings. But he'd glimpsed shapes in the darkness that defied explanation. Shapes that darted too quickly or melted into the black. Whenever he tried to recall them later, they felt like nightmares conjured by an overactive imagination. Marcus emerged from behind a cluster of stacked crates. "I've got the generator prepped for tonight," he said wearily. "We need to ration the remaining fuel carefully. If we can't find a new supply soon, we'll have to cut down on the greenhouse lighting." Nadine's face fell. Cutting the greenhouse lights was practically a death sentence for their crops. Jonas clenched his jaw. Desperation was setting in. Without workable seeds, fertilizer, or alternative power sources, Haven's future was anything but certain. Later that day, Jonas found himself sitting on a broken stone bench at the center of the courtyard, feebly illuminated by a single hanging lamp. He watched as small groups drifted by, some clutching battered tin cups of watery mushroom soup. Leanne, the guard from earlier, paused to talk with Jonas, her voice hushed. She spoke of scavengers who had ventured beyond the city's perimeter to search for rumored stashes of supplies. None had returned. Jonas felt a chill creep along his spine. As the conversation ended, Winston approached, flanked by Marcus and Nadine. He waved Jonas over to a side corridor. "We've decided," Winston said quietly. "We'll mount a new expedition to the old science labs. We need better ways to grow food, and maybe a better answer to this darkness." Nadine nodded in agreement, crossing her arms against the cold. "I'm going too." Winston's gaze slid to Jonas. "We're forming a small team, 4 or 5 at most. In and out. Marcus already volunteered. I'd like you with them." Jonas felt a swirl of apprehension and resolve. "Count me in." They spent the next few hours gathering supplies: warm clothing, water canteens, rope, a few precious bullets for the old rifles, and the handful of flares Marcus had discovered. The plan was simple in theory: travel east, skirting the main thoroughfares where unknown assailants might lurk, and enter the facility's sublevels, then retrieve any valuable equipment or data that could guide their greenhouse improvements. At the appointed time, Jonas, Nadine, Marcus, and 2 other volunteers, Rhea and Caleb, slipped through Haven's Gate and into the wet hush of another never-ending night. Their flashlights provided meager illumination. The group moved in carefully choreographed motions, scanning each alley, clearing each blind corner. Rhea, a skilled marksman, took the lead with a rifle at the ready. Caleb stayed close, eyes darting. They passed mile after mile of collapsed roads and deserted buildings. Broken signs jutted from sidewalks. Some read "evacuation route" in chipped letters. Others simply advertised relics of a lost era, movies that no one would watch again, restaurants that would never reopen. The debris-laden sky pressed down on them, stifling, an unrelenting canopy of swirling dust. The deeper they traveled, the more evident it became that this sector was far from uninhabited. Paw prints, too large for most dogs, tracked the muddy ground. Odd scuff marks appeared on rooftops. Jonas could practically feel eyes watching from behind shattered windows. An unsettling presence lingered in the gloom, fleeting as a gust of wind, yet undeniably there. Their journey stretched into hours. At last, a massive silhouette emerged ahead. The science facility, ringed by a chain-link fence covered in barbed wire. The fence had partially collapsed, leaving twisted metal rising from the ground at unnatural angles. Inside, a sprawling courtyard gave way to multiple angular buildings, whose walls had begun to crumble with time and neglect. Jonas spotted a sign half buried in rubble: Institute for Agricultural Research. Rhea used bolt cutters on a section of fence. They slipped through, hearts pounding. Closer to the building's entrance, the group had to navigate a labyrinth of collapsed walkways and broken pillars. In the near-absolute darkness, each step risked a sprained ankle or fall into unseen chasms. Marcus used a flare to reveal a diagonal corridor leading to a set of steel doors. When the flare's brilliant red glow burst forth, Jonas caught a fleeting glimpse of movement in the distance, a shape that slunk from behind a collapsed section of wall. He froze and aimed his flashlight, but the shape disappeared. Heart hammering, he motioned for them to hurry inside. They needed to get away from open spaces. Within the building, the pitch-black hallways felt strangely claustrophobic. Cracked tiles littered the floor, and water dripped from crumbling ceilings. The stale air recalled the old shelter they'd ventured into earlier, but in this place, the hush felt more menacing. They advanced down a corridor, checking door after door. Most rooms were labs stripped of anything valuable. Broken equipment lay strewn about in shards. "Over here," Nadine called softly. She'd found a door marked hydroponics. It looked mostly intact, though the glass was shattered. Stepping inside, they saw a labyrinth of pipes and water tanks. The overhead lights, dormant for ages, hung like ghostly relics. Jonas could almost imagine the facility bustling with scientists, eager to feed the world even in the face of cosmic disaster. Now only dust and ruin remained. Caleb discovered a locked storage room. Marcus managed to pry it open using a crowbar. Inside, they found boxes of nutrient solutions, some containers mostly empty, others cracked, but a few sealed well enough to be potentially usable. Nadine took out small vials and pored over the labels with excitement. "This might give our greenhouse a fighting chance," she breathed. Rhea and Caleb carried the boxes into the main corridor, preparing to load them for transport. But just then, an unearthly howl reverberated somewhere in the structure. It was neither purely human nor animal, but an amalgamation of shrill notes that made every hair on Jonas's neck stand upright. Everyone froze, exchanging panicked glances. "Time to go," Rhea muttered. Marcus extinguished the leftover flare, reloading his rifle with trembling hands. The group hurried back through the winding corridors. That low, scraping sound, reminiscent of the shelter's catacombs, seemed to come from all directions at once. A flit of movement flickered at the far end of the hall. Jonas caught a pale blur, long limbs, eyes glowing faintly in the reflection of the flashlight. A figure humanoid, but with elongated proportions, bolted toward them, moving unnervingly fast. Rhea fired a warning shot. The muzzle flash illuminated a grotesque visage. Skin stretched taut, eyes sunken yet glinting with the faintest reflection. The creature let out another shrieking wail as the bullet grazed its side. Jonas felt a wave of horror, uncertain if he was facing a hybrid beast or a person twisted by darkness. They ran, flanked by more of these shapes as they skittered through holes in the walls. One lunged at Marcus, who smashed it aside with his rifle stock. Another grabbed at Kayla, claw-like fingers ripping flesh from his arm, before Rhea pulled the trigger again. The corridors roared with echoes of gunfire and screeching. Adrenaline surged in Jonas's veins as they made for the exit. He fumbled a flare from his belt, igniting it and tossing it behind them. The sudden burst of intense light caused the creatures to recoil, their shrieks growing disoriented. In that precious window, the group tore out of the building and back into the courtyard. A drizzle of cold rain pattered down, the cosmic debris overhead swirling with gray shadows. Nadine and Marcus half-dragged Caleb, whose wounded arm dripped blood on the cracked pavement. Rhea held her rifle at the ready, scanning for danger. Jonas cast a final glance over his shoulder to see a pale face in the building's doorway, wide eyes burning with a feral glow. "Move!" Rhea ordered, and they sprinted toward the broken fence. Before long, they were weaving through the deserted streets once more, hearts pounding. Even as they fled, Jonas sensed the presence tailing them, flickering in and out of alleyways, never fully retreating. The only advantage they had was the disorienting brightness of an occasional flare which seemed to repel the twisted creatures. After a torturous journey back, the gates of Haven appeared. Leanne and two other guards quickly ushered them inside, slamming the barricades shut. The exhausted group collapsed in the courtyard, panting, eyes wild with terror. Caleb clutched his wounded arm, face ashen. Blood was seeping through his bandages. Medical personnel rushed over, checking the torn flesh. Winston arrived, breathless, as rumors spread of an attack on the returning team. He helped them lay the supplies gently on a table. Nadine, still trembling, recounted the story of the creatures. Rhea described them in clipped words, her eyes darting over each shadowy corner as if expecting them to appear at any moment. Marcus, quiet and pale, kept glancing at his weapon, as though replaying the confrontation in his head. Jonas placed a hand on Nadine's shoulder, trying to steady himself as well as comfort her. "We got what we came for," he said, voice shaking slightly. "The nutrient solutions might save our crops, but—" He trailed off, unable to comment on the horror they had encountered. Winston examined the containers, eyes alight with a grim sort of hope. "If these can help our greenhouse, it was worth it," he said quietly. "But we'll need to reinforce the defenses, especially after what you've seen." That night, Jonas couldn't sleep. He sat near a lamp at the edge of the courtyard, rifle across his lap. Every nerve felt raw. He kept staring into the unlit world beyond the walls, imagining shapes darting among the ruins. Nadine eventually joined him, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. In her eyes, Jonas saw more fear than he'd ever witnessed in her before, yet mingled with the fear was determination. "We can't stand by while those things multiply," she whispered. "If they're out there, if they used to be human or not, they may come for the settlement." Jonas gave a weary nod. Agreed. We have to be ready. Still, no matter how many generators they kept running, how many floodlights they rigged, or how many bullets remained in their meager arsenal, the darkness spanned every horizon. The night was endless, creeping into their minds, their hopes, their very souls. In the corner of the courtyard, Caleb winced in pain as the medic stitched up his wounds. Another survivor hammered nails into wooden boards to patch the southwestern fence. Sparks intermittently illuminated the gloom, but they were fleeting reminders of what once was, a world brimming with light and promise. Down the corridor, Winston cataloged every potential item that could help them last another day. Rhea cleaned her rifle in silence, tension coiling around her like a spring. Marcus paced near the generator area, wrestling with thoughts of future scavenging runs and the horrors they might bring. Nadine took the newly acquired nutrient solutions to the greenhouse, kneeling among the mushrooms and seedlings, praying in quiet words that they would sprout. All around them lingered the hush of eternal night, broken only by the occasional hiss of wind against barricades, the rattling of a loose metal sheet, or the distant, haunting cry of something not quite human. Even here, in Haven, each passing hour chipped away at reserves of courage. They lived in a fragile equilibrium, each soul carrying the burden of forging life in a world that had forsaken daybreak. Jonas closed his eyes and pictured a sunrise he barely remembered. Reds and oranges splashed across the sky, golden rays glowing on fields of green. He wondered if, someday, the debris might part and allow a single beam to pierce the gloom again. The scientists who once labored in that facility might have believed in such a possibility. Or perhaps they knew it would never happen and tried desperately to adapt Earth to its new cosmic reality. Jonas's memory flickered toward the creatures lurking out there. Whether once human or born of darkness, they symbolized the final transformation of this world. He resolved that as long as one settlement still fought for survival, the last glimmer of humanity would not be extinguished. He lifted his gaze to the swirling sky. Beyond the haze, behind the impenetrable cloak of cosmic debris, the sun still burned. Though its rays could not breach the barrier, Jonas believed it remained. A hidden promise that light and warmth had not vanished from the universe, only been hidden from Earth's surface. If humankind could endure against the unrelenting dark and the terrors it bred, maybe they would one day see a dawn again. Gently, Nadine reached out, laying her hand over Jonas's. They sat together in silence, finding an unspoken bond in the knowledge that hope was their greatest weapon. Beyond the walls, the eternal night stretched on, ominous and unyielding. But inside Haven, people still clung to each other, working tirelessly beneath the faint glow of lamps and the quiet hum of a generator. Across the courtyard, Winston loaded the day's final data into a battered computer, determined to glean any scientific advantage. In the greenhouse, seeds slept in the soil, ready to wake if given even the slightest nourishment. Their world was overshadowed by cosmic dust, haunted by twisted beings prowling the darkness. Yet each life in Haven was a small, unwavering spark. Even in the absence of sunlight, they fought. They resisted the gloom that threatened to suffocate them. They faced down horrors that lurked in shadowed corridors, seeking to devour any sign of hope. Jonas knew the road ahead would only become more perilous, with resources dwindling and fear growing. The creatures might come in greater numbers, and not every expedition would achieve success. Still, Haven stood in defiance, forging a fragile beam of light, a candle that refused to be snuffed out. So long as that light persisted, even if only in their hearts, the shadows would never fully conquer them. Needing a sense of resolve from the day's events, Jonas at last rose from his makeshift seat. Nadine followed him back into the settlement's core, where they would bolster walls, distribute nutrients to half-starved crops, and cling to one another's courage. Outside, the night pressed in, vast and eternal. Inside, they fought without pause, determined to hold on to the fragile possibility that one day, somehow, the shadows might recede, and daylight would break over their world once more.